Okay, humans. It's cold. 57 out here. It's a decent insulation, so when it gets cold at night, it keeps it cold during the day. And I hadn't been in here until now. But in general, it's a very cold year. We're running maybe consistently 10 to 12 degrees colder across our state over the last few years. So we took a big drop down in temperature. But today we're at the 20th of May. If you go and look at some previous videos I had done, you'll notice that I had talked about something that might come in around the 19th or 20th, an emotional spike kind of thing. This was in the data sets from the Alta reports years ago, not specifically for this particular month or anything, but a descriptor set that the most recent time I've run for emotional intensity values, I thought I saw a few indicators that that older forecast was going to happen around the 19th of this month. And so I'd mentioned this in a few videos saying, hey, something might come in around on the 19th of the month that will provide us this emotional jump off or levering or propelling into desperation language. And that, just heads up, right? And then we arrive at this point in time, we get the FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, being spewed out of a giant FUD hose all over the crypto markets. And it was deliberate, it was done for someone's plan, someone's agenda. We can speculate that somebody acquired cryptos in the process, flushing out the weak hands, attempting to alter the balance of power, so to speak, within the ownership of cryptos. And so we arrive at the 19th and we get the precipitous plunge down. Now that happened to coincide with the old forecast from the Soaring 20s report, which was December of 2017, maybe. I have to look again. But anyway, we'd had 64,000 as a strike point, at which time we would have a drop that would exceed 30%. Now, I wrote it as 30+% because I didn't want to tell people that it was likely to be a 50% drop. So if you go back and you read those old reports, it'll say 30+%. And factually, at the time that I came across that data, it's like, I know that the net result on this is going to be precipitous and it will be greater than 30%, but will it reach 50% and will it be 50% of the all-time high or 50% of the most recent high, or, how do you judge that, right? So 30% was a good indicator because it was all about a visceral response, because the data sets had described it as a point at which many people would start literally feeling like they were going to vomit. And so in that sense, it was a little tiny mini echo of the kind of emotional reaction and physical flushing that people encountered in the 1929 crash. So this is what I'm saying, right? Okay, so time is tricky shit, right? Pay attention. So we've all been bombarded with FUD. But that FUD was forecast in started being forecast in 2014 or so, and was culminating in a set that as I think of it, as matured in 2017 and was reported in December of that year within the Alta reports, okay? That's when this little forecast was written up. And so here's the problem on all of this in terms of in discussing the woo of it all. So this is FUD woo or woo FUD, all right? It's actually FUD against woo is what's coming out now. That's what we've just experienced, was a giant manipulation. Elon Musk's shit postings, his shit tweets, everybody else who was in there, all the big players, all of that verbiage was aimed at one goal, which was to get all of the weak hands to dishoard, to unhodl. And it had been forecast in 2017 from a set that had been really, this was the maturation process. So just briefly, we would get a set of data that would grow like this over time and would be complete or mature at this point here when it was put into the report, but it would have linguistic threads that would go all the way back to its inception point. And so each and every one of these sets would be, each and every one of these circles would represent a period of data gathering in which more and more data glommed into that same set around that same meme, if you will, or theme, and that thematically it grew over time until it emerged in this forecast. That's conceptually something that we're looking at here. All right, so this though was that data set there referenced the emotional ties back to 1929. At that time, it wasn't reported, but it was in the data, and because of the nature of what we were going through in 2017, plus the fact that I was also basically dying of cancer, undiagnosed, didn't know what it was, etc. It could only work a brief period of time. Every day on these things, I was just simply not able to keep up with it. So I wasn't able to be voluminous and put in 30,000 words if I could get away with 3,000 words. Physically did not have the capability. Anyway though, so the data sets then were pointing at 1929 as a specific inception point, very much like the data itself, as a specific inception point for the echo that we're living through in this time. So the concept that was attempting to be, that I derived out of that data was that the 1929 crash, which we think of as happening just in 1929, but it was actually a series of crashes. And they started in 1929, but they went all the way through until 1933 when the bond market crashed. What we're going to go through is a rhyming echo of that, not a retrace, not a repeat in any way, but the emotional outpouring, the emotional responses to the conditions in 1929 through 1933 will be echoed now. So this is from 1929 to 1933, and there's a whole lot of stuff in here, by the way, that also needs to be brought up relative to Judaism, to Jewish people, to specific contracts, and those sorts of things. Because those also are going to be echoing over this next period of time, which that forecast was for our time now, 2021 through 2025. And it'll actually happen, most of it will happen in 2021 through 2024, but there will still be a little trailing bit in 2025. That's why it's written out that way. But it'll be a rhyming echo to the emotional trauma that everybody went through then. Only now we're going through that same emotional trauma, curiously, probably caused by the same group of people. And this time the response is going to be different. So in 2025, the outcome will be remarkably different than the setup than 1933 left for the rest of that decade. And there's so many layers of the temporal aspects of it that I'm just not going to get into, okay? But I know that the data sets at the time, in 2014 through 2014, Bitcoin was just nascent, right? Hardly even being mined. So the FUD aspects of it and the specifics about 64,000 had not arrived in 2014. They had arrived by 2017, so that we had a much more fleshed out view of the reality in which this data set is maturing. And so we end up with this forecast here of, at the time, the forecast was basically, as we got up to 64,000 on one side or the other, 64,000 per Bitcoin, we would have a crash that might take us down all the way down to 50% of some major high. So maybe it was going to be 50% of that 64,000, right? Which would result in us going down to 30,000. But we actually hit a low of 29,000. So it was about half of some major high. Probably we went up to 64,000 and then hovered in the upper 50s or something for some time. I don't pay attention to prices, so I don't know, but probably hovered up in the upper 50s, and it was 50% of that value. We go down to it, and then we rise back up. Now, what I did do was to go on out and check the actual transaction volumes on the blockchains, on Bitcoin and Ethereum and all the other, just Bitcoin and Ethereum and Bitcoin. It's a SV but one of the other alt Bitcoins. I just went and looked at the blockchain transaction volumes during this period of time to see if we had a setup that would actually show the volume on the premise is that if we're going to have a precipitous drop, you will see the same kind of activity on the blockchain of the coins changing hands as you do on the way up. And we didn't. So I knew right off that any price stuff was all basically within the exchanges. It did not translate over to the blockchains themselves. So it did match the fear, uncertainty, and doubt stuff that came out of that data set, culminated in 2017. And thus I was pretty sanguine about the price drop, didn't care much. As I say, I don't follow the prices anyway, right? So, but it didn't worry me because I knew as part of that data set from way back when in 2017 that there were some very interesting aspects about this particular time. And so if we had the temporal marker right here show up, and aha, we did, so we had a TM here in this set, and it showed up, it manifested, right? Okay, so good, because maybe, and by the way, this is a truism within the work I had done, that once you start getting major temporal markers show up, the odds favor the next temporal marker also showing up. In other words, the sets are cohesive. They appeared to be cohesive in their prescient value throughout the range of material within that set. And so if one of the temporal markers shows up, then it increases the odds of the others showing up. And as each and every one of those do show up, you get into a situation, got to reset and stuff, where you get up to a point where you feel, as an outside observer of this, that there's a certain level of certainty to these, to the remaining temporal markers also showing up. And so here are some of the other temporal markers, right? 100,000 parties. And that's a temporal marker that was associated, is in that set. And that was going to happen in the same year that this event happened. And in that same year, this event was going to happen before the coming December. So in other words, before Christmas. So in the data sets, back in 2017, it was discussed in such a way that one got the impression that there would be $100,000 Bitcoin parties around Christmas time, around holiday times, right? Such that people were in a much more happy mood. They were very ebullient. They were, open the champagne, and get out the oysters, that kind of thing, right? And la la la, seasonal thing. Now there's a lot going on in this thing. It's a wonderful life kind of a picture, or sort of it is, because even in that film, It's a Wonderful Life, there's a background of the Depression of the 1930s, and it's the realization of the human values within that depression that made that movie have its redeeming qualities, right? It presented you with redeeming qualities to the depression itself. Now this was what the report was doing, was presenting me the redeeming qualities to the conditions that would otherwise seem somewhat depressing. And as you know, I'm not depressed. I'm a little beat up because I was in the car for too many hours yesterday, and my old bones are, I'd rolled too much in my life and fought too hard, and so my bones, you know, they don't like being crammed in and held steady in that position for too long. But in any event, but no, I'm not depressed. I'm just achy. But anyway, so we have $100,000 Bitcoin parties to look forward to, and presumably, if this data set will mature at the same rate as all the other temporal markers, its accuracy rate should be pretty good, and it should show up sometime before December. And there's a lot going on within this data set. It was a very prescient data set. It had within it some spectacular hits like the Blondes on boats, the Costa Concordia's sinking and all of that. There were many, many, many other temporal markers in this larger set, right? And so I'm fairly content that the other things will occur, that we'll get this $100,000 parties. Now, that's not the end of Bitcoin, right? It doesn't stop at 100,000. But within the data sets, we got to the point where we were celebrating the 100,000 Bitcoin, at the same time sad that the dollar was so shitty, but at the same time there was hope that because of this other stuff that was developing, but I'll get back to that in a minute. But within it all, at the same time, almost instantly after the $100,000 Bitcoin parties, we get to this point where Bitcoin becomes unobtainium, all right? So at that point, yeah, you can buy a few Satoshis, but the people that have the Bitcoin are basically thereafter able to name their own price if they decide to sell. And so it becomes something that ultimately becomes worked up to the level of settling sovereign debt over time. And at this point, as we transition in this period of 2021 through 2025, as we get in here, the Bitcoin will go to the point where you just don't see it transaction. There won't be a lot of activity on public exchanges for whole Bitcoins or large quantities of Bitcoins and so on. Satoshis will rise in value and will represent their own basic level of cryptocurrency where you know, you work to buy a whole Satoshi, that kind of a thing, right? Or your first Satoshi. Anyway, though, so the Bitcoin's going to continue on up. It is it had long lifespan within the data sets in the prescient component, and presumably at this stage, the data sets have, and my interpretation of it, have proven of value. I mean, some people have made themselves millionaires from reading my shit and following it. And so I have a good anticipation. I have a good anticipation that over these next few years, the rest of this data set's going to mature. And so the rest of that data set contains stuff like a terrible winter coming up, a revolution in Europe, revolution in the United States, and all different kinds of bizarrenesses. But all of the language in here has to be understood within the context that's going to be occurring. All right, so in the background of all of the stuff that's going to be going on with the financial system and all of the FUD that they're heaping out, trying to control it. And the point of the FUD was for someone to gather Bitcoins and to drive out all of the weak hands. And then basically what they're trying to do is to move the herd around by spewing out FUD from various different angles onto the populace, onto humanity. Now, in the background of all of this FUD spewing over 2021, we have piling up in here. So I'm going to remove this here. Yeah, okay, so within this data set that basically matured in this process here, and it begun way back in like 2003, and its main point of maturation was in those years, we have things like the revival, all right? And I'll just put it that way, revival. And we'll get into that in a second. we also have the winter, and we have the EU, and I'll put it down here as Vikings. And we have tons more stuff that was within this data set that we are able to track because of specific temporal markers that we can see emerge, prices, right? So it's not ambiguous. We didn't go up to 75,000 and fall down. And we didn't go up to 60,000 as the all-time high and fall down. We went up to somewhere around 64,000 as an all-time high and then fell down. So we have that as a temporal marker that has a numeric value. That's why I tried to get as many numeric values teased out of the data sets as I possibly could as we went forward. And most of them failed, right? Because the data sets were just so riddled with numbers that part of the processing that I did in order to extract the prescient language was to just throw away numbers like mad. Because they're all, like, the internet is composed of numbers, right? That's a basic substrate. So you can't really, you can't take it at face value when you encounter it in this kind of weird-ass woo process. And so all the numbers had to be thrown out. But whenever I did get some, I would always put them into the reports because they were good for this particular thing. Just like wherever I could, I tried to label an image, right? Something that would stand out, that could not be denied later on and could be used as a clue into a particular, as a pointer, so to speak, into a particular point of reality. Blondes on boats, right? And in the data sets, it describes a situation where a blonde woman was taken to where she should not go, and aha, that's what occurred with Costa Concordia. It came out in the very first article, so it was linguistically a really good pointer to put blondes on boats as the title for that. Just as we you know, the 64K, $64,000 question. And so there we go, right? At the time that was written, back in 2017, I think we'd hit 2,000 or 20,000 on Bitcoin at that point. But probably that number was emerging way back, maybe 2016, maybe even 2015, back in the stage when it was totally unbelievable. Probably at 2015, maybe we were in, you know, double digits for Bitcoin. I don't follow prices that well, so I don't have a real good memory of what time what number appeared. I have to go look that shit up, and I'm lazy. Anyway, so within that set here, we also had $600 gold or silver, $600 silver, and other stuff relative to gold that I'm not going to go into now because it deserves its own separate video. But in any event, the silver was also in that set. We also had within this set right here for temporal markers, we had this Antarctica. We had the UFOs and others, right? So here we are, right? We've got the UFO sets that were predicted, the secrets revealed coming out. We have, you know, being disgorged from deep in the government, in a background of rioting in the streets in the United States, rioting in Europe, in the background of the sun disease, you know, so the sun disease, which the sun has a what? Corona. And it was confusing because the sun itself, the big scary ball in the sky, can be thought of as being diseased because we're in the grand solar minimum, where we have very little sunspots, so it's behaving abnormally. All of these sets were in that same set as this here, which still has these out there and many other predictions as forecast yet, right? Because they're not really predictions, they're forecasts that the language would appear. Whether or not the language actually accurately describes the events, we couldn't know at this point. All we could really forecast was that the language would appear. And so arguably, a lot of people are talking about $600,000, $800,000, $900,000 silver. So arguably, we hit that mark. Whether or not we ever actually get transactionally that level of value. However, transactionally, we did hit that mark, and you can plainly see if you go and look on Twitter and these kind of places, you know, a copy of that being written and published publicly in that year. Anyway, so Revival Antarctica. And so the Antarctica stuff is connected to the UFOs obliquely, but also is focused on what I chose to call real human history. And real human history was part of the counterpoint to the FUD, to the fear, uncertainty, and doubt that the powers that be are spewing out over us with all of their diseases and all of their other bullshit, right? Still trying to maintain control as all of the masses wake up. And as all the normies become unsettled in the pack. And at this point, we've had arguably a number of the pointers, the precursor pointers that I would have expected around Antarctica and around the UFOs are here now. And we for sure had this, so we're just ticking them off like mad, right? This one's coming up. This one right here is a maybe. Maybe that's going to show up because it's linked to this. But there's some of the wooer parts of it, and that is on the outside fringe. We're seeing some of the actual appearance of some real human history kind of stuff popping up out of Antarctica. Now the EU, by the way, is all about the Vikings. It's about northern. Well, it's not. It's about all of the EU, but in conjunction, this is also obliquely linked. And so the situation is developing in Europe where there's going to be a Chad explosion, all right? Where they basically have fucking had it with Soros and the other globalist Nazis using the mass migration to destabilize their society, destroy their currencies, and disrupt their culture. And so part of all of these data sets, there were these two revolutions. Right here, the Viking Revolution and the Revival, which is AmRev 2, okay? Which is the American Revolution 2, which we're in right now. And that's happening right now. And so we can tick that off. And in fact, you've got this wacko group of individuals, some of whom I have disputes with, but I will nonetheless bring them up and I will claim them as a temporal marker within this here, because this was called the revival of Americana. This was called, in the data sets, this was called the reemergence and the revival of the American Revolution 2. It's going to be settling, it's going to be finishing the American Revolution as the globalists are met and dealt with, right? But at the moment we have Robert David Steele's bat tour, which is funny, connected to corona and bat disease, but I think it's something bats. But he's going on this bus tour all around the USA, going rah, 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 USA, Americana shit, right? Let's get our act together and kick these fucking globalists out. And okay, it's like, you know, Robert David Steele, he and I have disputes, I'm quite certain, but we're fellow travelers, right? We agree on that goal, so hey, I can get behind it, dude. More power to you. You know, watch out who you hang out with, though, especially these fucking Brits. You know, the Brit soccer hooligans, I like those guys, but a lot of the others you got to be careful of. Anyway, though, so, but AmRev 2 is the revival of Americana, and it's another one of these major data sets, and this goes on for fucking decades. Maybe 100+ years, I don't know, because we get into it real deep, because it's also associated with real human history. And it brings out an entirely new, this is the emergence of the new America, right? And so I won't live to see it, guys. I mean, I won't live to see the really cool parts, I think, out a few decades when the generation that is involved as the solid generation, as the rock upon which America is going to stand for the next couple of hundred years, emerges through this fourth turning that is happening right now. It is coming out. If you're an aware observer, you can watch it, you can see it. Go and look at the X-22 report on BitChute, okay, on BitChute. Dave puts out these great video reports, and he makes a point of showing fundamentally the little tiny incremental step by step by step by step by step emergence into reality of what I'm talking about right here in a much broader stroke. So I'm painting the broad brush here, and I'm sure he's not aware of it, but he's describing every single step that we're taking in when we look back later on, all of those steps will add up to this American Revolution too. Now, this American Revolution too is going to be coincident over the course of a terrible winter, in spite of the fact that in December we might be ebullient and everybody's celebrating. We're going to be celebrating more than just Bitcoin, by the way. There will be major turning points for that generation that will be visible by December. I don't know what the hell okay, so I'm not going to go into that, right? Because that's tied into the other videos with gold and stuff. But in any event, so by this terrible winter, when we get into the really nasty part of this winter, bear in mind we're in an ice age. The sun itself is in a grand solar minimum, so this winter is going to be brutal. And if you've got anything going this summer, set aside time to prepare for the coming winter months. Make preparations, prepare for grid failure, get food stored. I kid you not, get your shit together. But in any event, so, or move south, way south, that kind of thing. In American Revolution 2 is going to be coincident with what I called the Viking Revolution, or the pushback, or the anti-immigration wave. It had many different names for it as we wrote about it over the course of time in this number of years here. And the data sets describe a situation where within the EU, continental EU, which is now firmly decided because Britain's no longer there, so we'd crossed another milestone, and in the cultural context of what was going on, we had two things occurring relative to the immigration crisis, or three things occurring. The money had dried up to drive the immigrants, so there was no longer a giant push north, and the weather was just brutal, just terribly brutal up in the Scandinavian countries and the Faroe Islands, all the way down through Scotland and into almost all the way in through England, right? Having to do that actually has to do more with the Gulf Stream and the problems there, but we can't get into that now. In any event, so in the Viking Revolution, the brutal weather had finally really taken its toll on. It was starting to affect the actual natives, the Swedes, right? They were saying, burr, better get another coat, and so the immigrants were fucking freezing. No matter where they went, they just could not get away from the cold, and with the sudden lack of support, right? There was just no longer any kind of social support for. From the outside for the takeover of the country. So I'm suspecting that at that point, by that December, we get into, in following into the subsequent winter of January and February and March and April. Because bear in mind, in the grand solar minimum here, your falls will be, everything will be starting later. And so winter may not start until January. So you might skate on October and November and December and think you're good. And then January, February, March, April, and May, you get slammed. Anyway though, so in that period of time, without the external money coming in to support the organizations, which gradually filters down to all of the individual refugees, and is sort of like, under the table tips, the economic pressure was taken off of the invasion. And as a result, within the data sets, and as a result of the weather, a lot of the people were, especially after they'd been there a number of years, and it just didn't get any better for them, and as you get older, you can't take the cold, especially if you've lived all your life in the South. Also, the people are now shut in under clouds and terrible weather. They're not getting any sun. There's no vitamin D to be had that way. And so vitamin D is also a failure for them, and they're dying as a result of that. Severe pandemic among the darker-skinned migrants into the north based on vitamin D totally being depleted from them under ice age conditions. And so it's a pandemic of vitamin D depletion contributes to all of this stuff going on in here. And in the Viking Revolution, there's actually I don't want to say, it's not national warfare, but there is a concerted social effort as a result of violence breaking out, and the response is that the people have finally had it, and they get more violent, and then conditions get to the point where it is, as has been accurately and prejudicially described, it is ethnic cleansing, in the sense that the ethnicity of the attacking parties, the immigrants, and their mental condition at the time makes accommodation and treaties and resolution virtually impossible. And so there just seems to be a social impetus all through Europe to just shove all the migrants south. And that's what they do. And so it's like, whoa, you know, in the data reports, it's not described as a fun time for anyone, right? And the emotional outpouring from this is absolutely fucking horrific. And you've got no idea. And all I saw was something that I'm afraid that I don't want to read about it at the time because I don't want to live through it. And it was that horrifically written up in these data sets. So it's not going to be a good time, but that was what was forecast, was a Viking revolution. I called it that because it begins in Sweden and those areas, and the push is to drive people south. And it turns out they want to go anyway, because the weather just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. And, you know, it gets to the point where you got Italy, the boot freezing, you know. And it affects crops and all of this. Seriously, in 2021, as had been forecast, we are in the brutal winter. And that brutal winter is what announces Ice Age, you know, technically grand solar minimum. But Ice Age is going to be the operative word. And so here I am on the 20th of May. True, I'm at 47 degrees latitude, but I should not be here at these temperatures at this time of year. It should be in May. I mean, in past years, we were seriously into a decent spring. And now it's limping in at best. Anyway, though, so coinciding with the winter and the Vikings Revolution, we start in on this long period here in this revival. As I say, you know, I could not have conceived in 2017 writing about this stuff. I could not have conceived Robert David Steele's bus trip, you know, revival tent meeting going around the country. And it has all the flavors of a religious revival. Tent meetings and all. It's political, but it has all of the emotional accoutrement. Under the circumstances, you know, c'est magnifique. just tremendous. You know, I gotta say, hey, we did good there. Anyway, so, and oh, by the way, we actually now have real solid visual evidence. If you go and look on BitChute and a few other places, you'll be able to see Spanish troops throwing migrants back into the ocean. Now, true, the migrants only have to splash down and walk over around a fence to get back into Morocco. But nonetheless, they're doing it. They're just saying, fuck this, you know, and pitching them out. It's getting too much, right? And these immigrants are not children, women. They're 20-year-old, you know, they're military-age men. It's an invasion. Soros is paying for it. And he's also incentivized it. So, you know, you can't blame the patsies in any of this, but you have to deal with them. And it's an intractable situation. You can't sit them down long enough to explain to them why they're acting as a bad agent or a bad actor in this and why they've been set up. You have to let them figure that shit out on their own. Just as everybody that got involved in the FUD has to now figure out that, hey, it was a FUD hose job, right? They're hosing down the herd to get them to move over that way. And so, well, that's how you learn. And, you know, you won't sell so easily next time. Okay, so, here's a funny thing. All right, here's deep conspiracy. In October and November, in December and then January of 2019 and then January of 2020, on the Chinese part of the deep web, one could find videos that showed scenes of Chinese CCP Gestapo. Okay, the CCP has its own military force, separate from the People's Liberation Army. And they are actually somewhat contentious with each other. Anyway, though, the CCP, let's just think of them as like militarized police, all right? And these are the social police of the CCP. Okay, and so back then, in October and November of 2019 was when I first encountered these very disturbing videos of these CCP militarized police going through neighborhoods in Wuhan, in Hubei province, in PPE, personal protective gear. And they were carrying stuff, okay? They were also armed. They were also accompanied by armed PLA security guys, also in PPE, right? Their gear for the PLA was whitish. The CCP had a distinct manila-colored PPE, and they had a distinct manila-colored set of respirator gear to a full head thing. The PLA soldiers did not. The PLA soldiers had white PPE, they had a white full headgear mask thing, but they had these little breather units on the side, not tanks with air and stuff in them. And so there were these videos out on the deep web, and there would always be at least three of the CCP guys, and they would be surrounded by maybe as many as 11 or 12 of the PLA guys, and the PLA guys had long arms. They had some form. You're seeing these videos being taken from buildings way the hell up, so like 10 or 12 floors over the up over the activity that they're filming in Wuhan, as they're in the middle of the night watching this shit go on and wondering what's going on, and they're filming it with their phones, and these guys were brave enough to upload it to the deep web. And this is probably why the Chinese freaked out later on and shut the deep web down, their connection with it. But in any event, you would see the three CCP guys and their little cadre move down these alleyways with this gear, and then the PLA guys would all back out, leaving the CCP guys maybe 50 yards, or 25 to 50 yards, somewhere in there, distance away from the CCP guys, who would set down their gear, literally set it down on the road, fiddle with it. You can't really tell what's going on. It's in the middle of the night. They're messing with stuff. They're bent over it. Then they would stand back up, and they had some kind of a squeezy gun, some kind of a thing that required that they did some kind of an activity. At first I thought it reminded me oddly of bagpipes, where you smash the sack of air under your arm to get the air out through the horn. They were doing something that was that energetic. Now, it may have been that they were pumping something. After having heard this other thing that I'll tell you about in a second, this is what I've thought of. Maybe they were having to deal with the output of something that was highly compressed, that was going through some kind of a highly compressed hose, and the only way to deal with it was to clamp that hose under your arm, and it made your arm move as it pumped out. Because what would happen was they would stand there and they would sort of jump, and there would be these spurts of this stuff that looked like concert smoke. It would just sort of spurt out, and then it would disperse. It would expand very rapidly, and then the only one guy did that, and then they'd only do it just a little bit, maybe that long, just a half a second or something, maybe not even that, and then laboriously put it all back together, and then in the rest of the video, and then you'd see the cadre come back around them, and then they'd move off. And it's like, what the hell? Now, the people that were doing handling the whatever it was, the puffer, were armed. They had handguns. You could see this clearly. And they weren't, the two people that were with the person that handled the pumper had the handguns in their hands. In some of these videos, as the PLA guys move out, you can hear some kind of going on as people yell and shout at each other, and I don't speak Chinese, and I couldn't understand it anyway. That's not that good of a capture. And in some of these videos, you can hear them talking and stuff, and you can also hear occasionally gunshots. And you have no way to connect any of this to anything. So I went to, at the time, I went to the trouble, because it's been decades since I'd been involved in various different kinds of long arms. So I just don't recognize the various tones anymore, right? And so I wanted to be sure that I was not being set up or anything on this. And so I sent this video to a friend of mine who's in law enforcement and had him listen to it. And he said, yeah, he said, that's, you know, actually told me that, you know, I think that this is the make of the rifle and the Chinese are known to use this. And these were not, you know, modern submachine gun kind of stuff, right? This is like real grunt weapons. Like the guys in the Washington, D.C. are carrying with their 6 rounds, their carbines, that sort of thing. So anyway, so he said, yeah, he said, that sounds like the reply from, you know, this bouncing off of concrete walls. And this guy's in law enforcement and has testified on sound and shit. So I'm taking him at his word that this is his understanding of it. And so I thought, okay, so someone's shooting. Maybe they're shooting warning shots, or who the hell knows, right? You don't see the shots, you don't know what's going on, it's out of frame, that activity goes on. Anyway, though, so now, fast forward to now, literally today, I get sent this video. As a courtesy to the fellow, I check it out real quick, and it turns out to be this guy, Adams, Mike Adams. I want to say he's a health warrior or something. Okay, so some kind of health. He's, you know, a fit guy and everything. So that's his specialty, is health stuff. Anyway, and so he's talking about the idea that maybe the coronavirus was a sham and the spike proteins have been put out there in and of themselves, as themselves, to cause the problems that the spike proteins cause, and that they were done that the spike proteins were put out mechanistically. And that he's saying that specifically in New York, and I think he named some other city, that you know, there was patterns of death and destruction, in northern Italy, and which is true. Northern Italy was unlike any other part of Europe in terms of how it spread, and the number of people affected and how they went and all of that. Absolutely huge jump in everything, and the rest of Europe didn't have any of that shit, right? And so same here. New York, we had all the deaths and the chaos and all of that sort of thing. So anyway, you know, he could be wrong, and he's thinking there's a conspiracy for somebody to dump spike protein into the environment, and people were reacting to the spike protein being dumped into the environment, which was then later on labeled COVID, and for which they developed the vaccine, which is really another way to get the fucking spike protein into you, so that those people that are going to croak from it will croak from it. If you're going to die from the spike protein, then they want you to do so, apparently. And so this is his thinking. I'm sort of elaborating on his theme there, that this was a conspiracy not only at the level of Fauci and the vaccine, which we know to be true. He lied, all of that kind of bullshit. The pandemic was a scandemic. He lied about so much. It got us all off on all this stuff. So that part of it is true. But Mike Adams is saying that the pandemic goes back even further, that the coronavirus aspect of it was bogus, but the spike protein is not. That the long-term damage being done to people is because of the spike protein, which we know is true, that those people that have been affected by the spike protein can and do have long-term damage. They have not necessarily been affected by COVID, by a coronavirus is his take on it. They may have just been exposed to the spike protein itself through an aerosol or something like this. Now, it's at that point that I think, aha, I remember these videos, and curiously, didn't all this shit really go down in Wuhan at that time, and didn't it just go whoosh right out of nowhere? Yes, it did. Yes, it did. Maybe it's that evil, you know. Maybe it's more than just them fucking with a virus and attaching spike proteins to a coronavirus to say, hey, let's see what happens. I don't know. We'll never know. Or the likelihood that there will be a meaningful consensus on this is very low for a number of years. We're going to have to scrap about it for a number of years and fight over it for a number of years. But as we go and fight about that, we'll also have all of these other temporal markers to go through. I'm really looking forward to this one, and we have yet to go tick that one off, although we're building for it. And yes, I'm still putting pressure on Dick Allgaier and his band of surly RV pirates to do a video on what they know about that subject. And we'll see, maybe they will. And that's pretty much it for the day. There's all kinds of other stuff we could discuss, but I have to do things, as do you, and I hurt. So I'm going to do things slow and try and get unhurt for tomorrow. Yeah, the real revival, the Americana thing, it's going to be really cool. Those people that are defining themselves as patriots, I think we'll drop that term. I think it'll be become too prejudicial that the leftists, the progressives, the globalists will use it too prejudicial a way. But my term was always constitutional, right? That we're going to go back to basically a revival of the American ethos that was formed very naively by the populace in this grand experiment that led to that first revolution. And it was a wide-eyed naivete. Can we pull it off? Can we do this without kings? Can we do this without the globalists? Can we be self-governing? Can we be self-ruling? And, we need to finish that work for those bright-eyed kids. And they were, extremely young. They were the old farts too. But revolutions are, a thing for young men. And so the young men that are in the constitutional movement, right? They don't know it yet. They'll become that. They'll become constitutionalists. And they'll be probably labeled that or something similar. But those guys are going to get a big boost this summer. And let's say from July 4 on, okay, that will lead to other aspects, as I alluded, other aspects of celebration by December, okay? So there will be other aspects, economically, politically, socially. Those other aspects will also be part of this coming period that's been signaled by all of these temporal markers. And so there it is, and I'm sort of bragging, yep, got all that right, that sort of thing. But I wasn't wrong about that, and there's a whole lot of other stuff I haven't been wrong about. So let's see. Yes, I know I'm a bastard, but I gotta have my fun.